Today on the Mets Live Show, we have James Schiano of the Mets Dub Podcast, a part of the Foul Territory Network, and we're going to be discussing the latest on everything New York Mets, trades, rumors, all of that. Plus, David Wright finally is getting his number retired and entering the Mets Hall of Fame. I have a special video for him. All that and more on this episode of the Mets Live Show.
Tell me, baby, what we gon' do? Yo. Tell me, girl, what you wanna do? Yo. Cause I ain't waiting on you. I ain't waiting on you. Cause I ain't really got no time. I ain't really got no time to waste on you. To waste on you.
It is official. It has been announced. David Wright, our beloved captain, one of the best players in the history of the Mets franchise, leader of multiple categories, franchise records, and is finally getting his number retired and being inducted into the Mets Hall of Fame. Now, when David Wright was nominated for the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame last season, well, I felt like it was only right to make a tribute video. So now, again, I feel like it's only right to pay tribute to one of the best third basemen in the history of the New York Mets, David Wright. Yo, I think it's about time we have a conversation about one of the greatest third basemen for the New York Mets. Between 2005 and 2013, David Wright was Manny Machado, Nolan Arenado, and whoever else your favorite third baseman is. I'm gonna keep it a buck with you. He was him. We talking about 302 batting average, 208 home runs, 836 RBIs. Want more? 7-time All-Star, 2-time Gold Glover, and a 2-time Silver Slugger. Remember that time he blessed Philly with thunder?
Holy smokes! The captain is back!
You think it stops there, though? And while we talking about Hall of Fame, David Wright is our Hall of Fame. And if this guy is on the ballot,
It's going to be a tough turn anyway. The ball behind second base, he was going to turn that way to make a throw. Utley.
you damn sure know David Wright should be there too. Let's go Mets. Welcome back to the Mets Live Show. And with me now, joining me is a cool guy, cool dude from the Mets Dub Podcast, James Schiano. How we feeling today, man?
Feeling good, cool dude. I appreciate that intro. I'll take that one in stride.
Yeah, man. If you guys haven't seen the Mets Dub Podcast, go check it out now, man. It's wherever you hear your podcast. It's on YouTube. Follow them on social media. Real good people over there. Shout out to Draftneck Mark, my guy. So let's get to it, man. Updates on the offseason. Before we get to that, want to talk about one of our beloved, dear favorite Mets. David Wright finally getting his number retired and getting into the Hall of Fame. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's great. I think I'm almost 30 years old, so David Wright was like my Met growing up. Like I remember being at one of David Wright's first ever games at Shea Stadium, like when he was coming up. I don't know, it was like the first time I was ever super aware of like a Mets prospect, super aware of a Mets draft pick that was actually coming to fruition, like the guy that was going to work out. Like I think that there was a time with Mets minor leaguers in like the early 2000s, mid 2000s, where at least my dad and my cousins and my uncles were like, oh, all these prospects are bust. None of them are ever going to work out. But I was like, no, this guy's going to be different. Everyone believes this guy's going to be different. I swear to God, this guy's going to be different. And then you go to these games and he actually is different. And all of a sudden he gets good at the same time the team gets good. And like he's coming of age at the same time the team's coming of age. And you have these amazing seasons that are kind of fueled by him and all these veterans that came around him. And it was kind of this perfect thing. And it was really sad that it all just completely fell apart around him for things that weren't totally his fault. First, the stadium, which I don't think anybody consulted the right-handed power hitter about the dimensions of the new ballpark, and then of
Right.
course the spinal stenosis. But like it's a beautiful thing and it's well deserved. And David Wright truthfully was on pace to be one of the greatest Mets of all time, and like he's truthfully my favorite Met I think I've ever watched play, just because of the timing and the age and stuff. Francisco Lindor won, so though still plenty of space to pass him, but it's just where it was and how it worked out. It was beautiful. So I think this is just going to be a really, really, really nice event and a really nice moment for a lot of the Mets fans who are around my age to, one, feel old, and two, like feel an appreciation for a player that truthfully kind of feels like the most talented Met we've ever seen.
I second that, man. Everything you just said is 100% facts. I mean, David Wright was, you know, coming into a Mets fan, right? Because I became a Mets fan around 2004, 2005, because my best friend, next door neighbor, was a diehard Mets fan. And it was just like, dude, why do you like those guys so much? And then, but when I started seeing a lot of, the Jose Reyes and David Wright, I'm like, ooh, that's interesting. And then in 2005, it just blew up. Carlos Beltran, Pedro Martinez. That was like, okay, made my choice, made my decision, and that was, but David Wright, there's not a lot bad I can say about him. Consummate professional on the field, off the field, never in trouble. Handled the responsibility as a captain, as the face of the franchise with grace. So it's so cool to finally see him get his flowers on that day, July was it 17th or 19th?
Something like that, sometime middle of July.
So that's gonna be dope to see, and I'm definitely gonna be there. I know you're gonna be there. It's gonna be an absolutely amazing thing to see. So
yeah, it's also cool with Wright that he got to come back through for the second era of like Mets success. Like the fact that he was able to have his moments of leadership with Harvey, DeGrom, Syndergaard, be in the middle of the lineup with Daniel Murphy in the playoff run, the World Series. Like the fact that he got to bridge that gap for Mets fandom, for Mets success, is just, I don't know, just really like it locks him in for like that again, like the same era, like our era of Mets fans, which is really cool.
And that's exactly what, and this is going to be a segue to the next thing, because the first thing we're going to talk about is Pete Alonso. And when we talk about Pete and what is on the table from a Mets perspective, it's history, right? It's being the franchise player. It's being an all-time Met, right? Rare territory for, anyone really, right? Outside of Tom Seaver, David Wright. A few others had great moments, but, those two are what I think of when I think of just all-time Mets. And Pete Alonso has that here. Why isn't that why isn't that the point that's getting him to just get this deal?
I think that's a point that a general manager and executive like David Stearns isn't going to overweight. I think he just knows the market and knows what Pete Alonso's actually worth, and the fact that Pete and Scott Boras, probably more Scott Boras, are overplaying their hand a little bit, trying to use a little bit more sentimentality, trying to use a little bit more of like the way baseball used to work here for a second. And I'm not saying Scott Gomez, my God, doesn't know how the way baseball works right now, but I'm just saying the fact that there was a report that came out like this week right after New Year's that they're using the Prince Fielder deal as a model, the 9 years, $200 million, whatever contract. Prince Fielder is 28 years old, and I think that was known as one of the worst contracts that was signed in the last 20 years of baseball. So I think the fact that they're using things that everyone knows are mistakes, they're willing to just wait this out. I think both parties think they have a lot more leverage than they probably do, and the fact that the Mets are their leverage, I think they believe is the market, where I don't think Scott and Pete care about that. And I think Scott and Pete, they leverage the fact that there's not that many replacements available for Pete. I don't know how much David Stearns cares about that. So I really think that they're just in a game of chicken, waiting and waiting and waiting. And this probably can get a lot uglier before it gets better.
I agree. And speaking about how ugly it can get, we'll get there. I'm gonna get there to how ugly this can get, because it can get ugly. But I want to talk about Prince Fielder for a second, right? Because you hit on the fact that the contract was just one of the worst contracts signed. Now, at the time, because I was doing a little bit of research, looking up Prince Fielder's numbers, and Prince Fielder, for a lot of what was made of how his career ended, was a pretty solid hitter, right?
Oh yeah.
Played almost every day outside of 2 years. But the big thing about that contract, right? So he signs a $214 million contract with the Detroit Tigers, right? And that only lasts 2 seasons because they trade him to Texas and then the wheels fall off. I don't know how. Now, he had one all-star season in 2015, which was a really good season, hitting 305. But that to me is not the best. It's not the best way to approach it, right? You can't go back to Prince Fielder and say, well, this is what he can do when, the market really isn't heading in that direction. Now, initially, I thought when Christian Walker signed that he was going to sign for maybe something a little bit over 100 million. I didn't think it was going to be 60. Now, I might be a little bit off on that projection, but I thought it was going to be that. So I thought Pete was going to get something similar. So this can get to the point where it's heading to Michael Conforto territory. Do you think that?
I think it's. I don't know if it's going all the way to Conforto territory. Conforto was a much weirder case where he just wasn't. He didn't have the production that Pete still has, and I think even Fielder when he was getting to free agency, again, very different time. It was over 10 years ago. It was just different. But he was even more productive than Pete has been the last 2 years.
Right.
Where Pete is just simply right now. I think that there's been something going on in baseball for the last 5 years. I'm not saying it's like some grand conspiracy or anything like that, but it's just first basemen aren't really that valuable. Like a guy like Matt Olson, who he never got to the open market, so it's different, but he got traded with a lot of assets to go from Oakland to Atlanta. Right. He only got like $22 million a year AAV, and he's significantly younger and more agile than Pete. And while he wasn't as consistent as Pete, he had the top end seasons that Pete had. And then you look at a guy like Freddie Freeman, who you can't really compare anybody to Freddie Freeman because Freddie Freeman's like truthfully a first ballot Hall of Famer, but he didn't get a ton of money. Like he got a good amount of money. He was on the open market, and two of the best teams in the same league between the Braves and Dodgers are the ones competing for him at the same time. So I think this just has to be a moment where Pete kind of has to look in the mirror and be like, what am I actually worth? Like, I think he's been told by people around him, he probably thought himself he was worth something really different for the last few years because that was what it felt like when you hit 50 home runs as a rookie. It's like, oh, I'm gonna sign one of the biggest contracts ever. But I don't know, it's kind of a perfect storm for Pete Alonso in terms of fame, in terms of power, in terms of production. And now it's just not there at all at the same time anymore. And I think back, and it's kind of funny to when Pete got called up for the first time for the Mets in 2019 for opening day. And it's hard to remember the Wilpons now because Steve Cohen's done such a good job for so long, but the Wilpons were so terrible for such a long time, and they did so many bad things to the players. And then all of a sudden they do this amazing thing where they let Pete Alonso onto the team because he deserves it out of spring training. And they get so much credit, and Pete goes on and breaks the rookie home run record, and the Mets are competing for the wild card spot until the end of the year. But then you think about that, and it's funny that if they would have done what everybody expected them to do at the time, which was leave Pete Alonso in the minor leagues for 2 weeks, and they would have gotten the 7th-year team control out of him instead of only the 6th they wound up getting, Pete Alonso's a Met this year, and this isn't even a conversation. It's just funny how these things butterfly effect and work out, and the fact that right now Pete Alonso, Scott Boras, and David Stearns are having this complete staring contest, and there's just no end in sight.
Yeah, I feel like that report by Bob Nightingale really just like, oh, okay, so this is a little bit farther than we think. So what will be the solution for the Mets if Pete Alonso doesn't come back?
If he doesn't, we did a whole episode, the last episode, Messed Up about this, where we went through like literally every single replacement there could possibly be in Major League Baseball for Pete Alonso. And then you just kind of have to go down from top to bottom. So the first one you have to think is Alex Bregman, someone that's been linked to the Mets this offseason. But I think those rumors have dissipated a little bit. I think they've dissipated for good reason because while Bregman's a very good player, I don't think he's the same kind of doesn't have the same offensive firepower as Pete Alonso. And also Alex Bregman, if you sign him, he was offered a qualifying offer by the Astros. So you have to give up a draft pick to sign him. That goes to the Astros. And then you'll have to give him a long-term deal because you're going to be competing with other teams on the open market. And you're going to have to deal with the opportunity cost of you giving up that draft pick to get him. So while he's the easiest shoehorn option, I don't think he makes that much sense. Then you have Vlad Guerrero Jr., who I don't know. The Blue Jays probably should sell off and trade him, but doesn't seem like they're going to. But I think Vlad's impending free agency next offseason is really affecting the way the Mets are thinking about Pete this offseason. Then you have Nolan Arenado, who I don't know how much he has left in that tank. He's not due very much money, but you're going to have to trade to get him. He has a 3-year deal. He's in his mid-30s. He hasn't been that good for 2 years either. And Then you have internal options like Brett Beatty and Ryan Mauricio, who I don't think people want to see Brett Beatty get another shot. I think if this doesn't happen, which I'm still not sure it won't happen with Pete, but I think there's a good chance that Beatty winds up getting a lot more playing time than people think. And then you just have a lot of options that people don't really want to think about, like Yohan Moncada is a bounce back, Anthony Rizzo is a bounce back, who I don't think is very good. You could give Anthony Santander a first baseman's mitt and say, give it your best. You could trade for Yandy Diaz, but the Rays said yesterday there was a report that Yandy Diaz, Ken Rosenthal said that he might not be as available as people think. Luis Ariza's name has come up a lot in trade negotiations. He'd be as different of a fit than Pete Alonso as you could possibly imagine, while also still not being a good defensive player.
Right.
And then I don't know, maybe there's trades that we're not thinking about, like maybe Carlos Correa and his monster contract's available to play third base. Spencer Torkelson might be getting squeezed out of Detroit. Ryan Mountcastle, Tristan Casas. Like there are a lot of potential options, but the first base market has dried up significantly since before the holidays. And this is the reason why Boris and Pete really believe they have a lot of leverage to ask for the crazy money they're still asking for.
That's true. We'll see. We'll see how far this goes, because I really thought this was just, you know what, it's a match made in heaven. They did a lot of stuff in the in the playoffs, man. It was magic in the playoffs, and I really thought, hey, this is, you know, and that's not to say that Pete's not coming back. I think Pete's coming back. I'm pretty sure you think Pete's coming back, but for it to be here, it's like, wow. I really, truly did not expect that. But speaking of people coming back, Sean Manaea, the tribal chief, is back with the Mets, 3-year deal, $75 million on that contract. So how do we feel about this rotation heading into the season?
I'd say I feel quite good about it, but not great. Like I think Sean Manaea coming back is a big deal for the locker room, it's a big deal for the rotation, big deal just for innings. From the time the Mets lost to the Dodgers till free agency began, the Mets lost 500 innings off their major league team. That's just something that more than 500 innings. That was something that was going to be really hard to make up without someone who was really, really reliable. And I'm pretty confident in the combination of Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes. I see a lot of Severino Manaea in those two guys, but getting Manaea back himself, I think, is a huge deal. And I think that there's some foreshadowing in the Pete negotiations with what happened with Sean Manaea, where Manaea seemed like very clearly took less money and possibly less years to be a New York Met. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a message to Mets fans from the Mets that, like, most of the David Stearns, where it's like, this is not Billy Epner anymore. Like, this is not, this is not Sandy Alderson. This is not Omar Manaea. Like, we are here to make shrewd business deals. Like, we're not here for feelings. And I think that if Sean Manaea would have wanted his maximum squeeze every single dollar, every single year out of the Mets, he just wouldn't have been a Met. So I think this is partially like there's a hats off to Sean Manaea for taking deferred money, only taking a 3-year deal and being back on this team and trying to be a part of something special. But with him, again, I think this Mets rotation is totally fine. I think it's like one of the most middling rotations in baseball, which when you think you're going to have one of the 5 best lineups in baseball and a plus defense and a ballpark that's great to pitch in, that ends up as a really good thing. I wonder where the Mets are in acquiring another arm. I know there's been some conflicting reports on whether they're going to look for another arm or not. I have a feeling they might, just because it's still a little bit shaky. Like, we still don't know what's going to happen with Kodai Senga, Frankie Montas, Clay Holmes. Like, I like them, but I don't know what we're going to see. David Peterson, he had a great last year. He's never been able to stack 2 really good years together, so I don't know what's going to happen there. And Manaea, while he's been a horse for the last few years, like, you're still not like completely secure at everything you're going to get from Sean Manaea. So I think one more pitcher would really tie this thing together well, but I'm not. The Mets rotation, while going into the offseason, the thing I was the most scared about right now might oddly be the thing I'm the least worried about, which is a plus.
That is, I agree. Hopefully there is, because we want that. With pitchers is never too certain, right? There's been a lot of pitching injuries in Major League Baseball, and so you can never have enough pitching. That's why they have Blackburn and a couple other people there that can always jump in. So the pitching depth is what they're building on. And now yesterday on SNY, Andy Martino was talking about Roki Sasaki, and he said that right now they're not optimistic that the Mets will get him. So if the Mets still are in the market, then and it's not Sasaki, then who?
If the Mets are in the market as not Sasaki, I think that the one area they could go, which I could see them going, because they've really been linked to this guy and he fits their mantra and the way that David Stearns builds a pitching staff, it's Nick Pivetta. his market's been really, really quiet because he has a qualifying offer as well. And I don't think a lot of teams are willing to part with a draft pick and give him a multi-year deal because he's still, I'm not going to say he's a projection, but he's not exactly an enviable, desirable pitcher in the old sense of the way we used to evaluate pitchers. But if the Pete Alonso situation winds up falling apart in a way, that will be the Mets. The Mets will need to sign likely a first baseman or a third baseman who might also have a qualifying offer attached to them. And since they've already signed Juan Soto, who had a qualifying offer attached to him, if you sign a third player to a qualifying deal, suddenly you don't have to deal with the repercussions of signing that player anymore, to the extent of it, as in the draft pick. So I think that if the Mets wind up signing a second player with a qualifying offer, they'll be very, very, very willing to sign a third player with a qualifying offer, which would, again, be something like Bregman and Pivetta. But again, that's kind of me projecting depending on what happens with Pete Alonso's situation. But besides him, I think there are just going to be more pitchers that are traded that we're not really possibly thinking about right now. I know with the Corbin Burns signing in Arizona, they suddenly have a very crowded rotation. I have a feeling that they don't start the year with both Zach Allen and Jordan Montgomery on their roster. And if one of those guys winds up going, I think the Mets will be very involved in both if trade conversations happen there. I also wonder if there is a sneaky reunion that could happen for the Mets and Jose Quintana on a one-year deal that could still happen. He's someone who hasn't had a ton of a market so far. The Cal Quantrill's a guy that's out there. It's I don't know. I'm not going to call him a reliable back-end rotation, but I'm going to call him a pitcher with a beating heart, which is something else the Mets I think could use. I think there are Spencer Turnbull's out there. He's someone who I think is similar, who can be kind of a flex option, a swingman option between the start rotation and the bullpen. Another guy that the Mets could possibly use. I think there are some sneaky, some low grade options for the Mets to add a pitcher to this team right now. But again, I don't think it's the main issue right now. I think the Mets are moving on to Pete Alonso in the bullpen, but I think there's still the eyes and ears are open just in case they can improve this rotation.
Now, speaking of the bullpen, Andy Martino yesterday was also talking on the show. Chris Cotillo, right, was saying that the Alex Verdugo. No. I'm sorry. My apologies. It was the Will Simons was talking about the Tanner Scott on a high AAV deal, 2 years, not nothing crazy, but 2 years. They had the conversation with Tanner Scott. Is that a viable option? Do you think there's something there? And if not him, then who?
I really don't see it all between the Mets and Scott. Just based on the way that David Stearns built his team, the way the Mets have built these teams, I can't see the Mets paying a second reliever because they already paid Edwin Diaz $20 million a year, nearly $20 million a year, which I think it would cost if you want to sign Tanner Scott to a 2-year deal. Like you're probably looking at 2 years, $36 million minimum. So I think the Mets will be shopping in the next tier below him in relievers, where I think that they're going to try and get a reliever for a 1 or 2 year deal who's going to cost fewer than $10 million, so they think they can squeeze a little bit more juice out of, rather than the guy at the top of the market. And again, like I know the Mets are going to be linked to him. I think there's just a stage in the offseason where the relievers are getting all the publicity now, where in the first stage of the offseason, the Mets are linked to everybody. And the second stage of the offseason, the Mets are also linked to everybody. So now third stage of the offseason, the Mets are once again going to be linked to everybody because every agent knows the Mets have the money and they want to drive up the price of their own clients. So I think it's more likely the Mets shop in like the Ryan Stanek market, who we just had last year, who was a major piece in the playoffs. A guy like Dylan Tate, who could be a reclamation project. Same with Adbert Alzolay, two guys who have late inning experience but haven't recently or coming off some bad years, but you can kind of squeeze some more juice out of. A guy like Caleb Ferguson, who's an exciting lefty who has good stuff, who can pin on the Dodgers and the Astros and the Yankees. Someone like Danny Colum, who's another lefty, older guy with a lot of pitches from the Orioles. I can't see the Mets shopping in that top tier, top market for relievers. I know that might enrage some fan bases, some fans, because they think that our bullpen's not exactly up to snuff with some of the other contenders in baseball, but I'm really confident in what the Mets are and David Stearns and Jeremy Hefner and Eric Yeagers have been able to do with relievers the last few years. I'm very confident in Edwin Diaz. I'm very confident in Daniel Nunez. I'm very confident in Reed Garrett. I'm confident in the fact that we're going to be able to sign guys for $1 million or $2, and you're going to look up in June and be like, damn, that guy's a 1.6 ERA. That's awesome. Like, hell yeah, give him the ball right now. That's where I'm at with the Mets bullpen. I'm excited to see how it comes to fruition. I can't see, based on the other things this roster needs, because this roster still needs a batter too, right, giving possibly $20 million to one relief pitcher.
That's true. And I wouldn't be upset either way if they get him or if they don't, because I'm pretty confident in what they would do as a pivot. But that's the thing, right? Reed Garrett came out of nowhere last year, right?
No
Nobody really foresaw him having the type of season he had early on. Now he did taper off a little bit towards the end, but he was still solid all year long.
Oh yeah.
And so that these are the type of things, like you mentioned, that David Stearns is keen on. He has a very elite ability to evaluate players, especially in season. So whatever the case may be, I don't think the Mets are going to be, I'm not going to say they're not going to be suffering, but I wouldn't throw my hands in the air like, oh God, we're going to have a awful bullpen here going into the season, because like you mentioned, there's the bullpen is very up and down every single year. And, you'll find options coming out of nowhere, and they'll show up and they'll be good, right? Like you said, I have confidence in Daniel Nunez. I have confidence in Budo. I have confidence in Reed Garrett, because they showed it. They proved it, right? We don't get to the postseason if they don't have the seasons that they had, right? So, all the confidence in what they will do as far as the bullpen. Now, going back to the Chris Cotillo report, that the Mets were looking into the Alex Verdugo market. Apparently, there are conversations there with him. So how realistic is that? And does he replace Jesse Winker?
I don't know if he replaces Jesse Winker, but I do think that David Stearns wants to minimize how much time Starling Marte spends in the outfield and literal outfield this year. So I think with that, he wants to get someone else on this roster that could probably play outfield defensively. And I think that that's Tyrone Taylor's job. Like, he is the backup outfielder, no doubt right now. But based on the way the Mets have built their roster so far, and again, just based on where it is right now, Wednesday, January 8th, on the opening day Major League roster, you're going to have Brett Beatty, Luis Angel Acuna, and new signee, probably Jared Young. Those are probably spots in the bottom of your roster that you can improve. And I think a guy like Verdugo, who will be like a 1-year, $5 million guy, who has tons of Major League Baseball experience, who has a cannon for an arm, who's a good fielder, who, like, a lot of people don't like him. I mean, like, I'm not going to lie, like, there's a lot of reasons not to like him. But for 1 year, $5 million, as someone to put in the bottom of your roster just to be a 200 plate appearance guy, like, I think you can do a lot worse. I also don't even know if that's real. Like, I don't know how much he'll elevate the bottom of this team, because I still think no matter if you sign Verdugo or not, they still will look for a designated hitter, possibly like a relatively daily designated hitter who hits from the left side. And then you also probably still want Pete Alonso at another corner infielder. Jeez. Sorry, the siren's going by. It's messing with me. But I think that, again, like, I just think they need some bodies. Like, the Mets outfield depth is not great if you look down the AAA team right now. Like, you're going to have guys like Jose Azocar, Edward Olivares, like Rafael Ortega. Like, those are players who are going to get meaningful at-bats, because players get hurt in the course of Major League season. Like, there's no way Starling Marte is out there for 160 games. Right. There's just no shot. Like, you need other bodies who are Major League caliber outfielders. So I think a lot of people see the name Alex Verdugo are like, this is gross. The Mets need Pete Alonso. But, like, you're not like doing these things in order. Like, this isn't like a checklist that has to be done right in the A, B, C, D order. Like, they need bodies. The Mets definitely need another outfielder on this 40-man roster. And I don't see that. I don't think 1 year for Alex Verdugo or $5 million would be a bad thing.
Hey, I'm with that, just because at the end of the day, you're not asking him to do what he did with the Yankees, right? Like, you're not asking him to be the guy out there playing left field, getting, 300, 400 at bats. Like, you're asking him to come off the bench from time to time or DH, right? So I'm with that. If that's what they really want for Alex Verdugo, if that's what it comes down to. So how confident are we in what the Mets are building, and what will the ultimate final result be heading into spring training?
I'm supremely confident. I think that even at this Mets team, as it's currently constructed right now at this second, you're probably looking at like an 85 to 90 win team. Like, something about how the team went around last year. Because right now you're on like a 1-to-1 change of Juan Soto for Pete Alonso. You have a full year of Mark Vientos. I don't know. I'm expecting a step forward for Francisco Alvarez. I love Jose Siri's glove in the outfield. I love Lindor. I love Nimmo. I think McNeil, based on what we saw in the second half last year, we can expect at least a moderate bounce back. There's no way he's as bad as the player as he was in the first half last year. If you get even 100 innings from Kodai Senga this year, that could be a massive improvement on the rotation. Sure. Again, I told you I'm really in on Clay Holmes. I think there's a major upside projection there. I think that Frankie Montas is solid. I also don't think that Edwin Diaz is going to blow every single save in the first half either. Like, I think
No.
this is a legitimately good team. I think if you sign Pete Alonso and you add a couple little more pieces to fill in some cracks, like, you could be looking at a 95-win team here. I really do. I think this team's awesome. I think David Stearns has built it the right way. I think there's still a lot of work to do, of course. I'm not even just saying this year. I'm just saying in the future in general. We still need some of these prospects to come up and hit. We still want to see Brandon Sproat come up and be a player. We still got to see something from Jet Williams, Drew Gilbert, if we're not trading him. I'm so confident. This is the most confident I've ever been in the Mets organization in my entire life. And I can say that without pause, without hesitation. Like, between Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor, David Stearns, Carlos Mendoza, Steve Cohen, like, that's triumvirate that I never even could have imagined growing up and watching this team. And every single day I wake up and there's a smile on my face because I'm really confident in the Mets motion, and that's the world I like to live in.
Me and you both. It's beautiful to see the Mets in the position that they're in, and being involved in these big time deals, being involved in so many things that they've been involved in, with an owner with who has a, the will to want to win, and this team, from the top to the bottom, is just built on guys who really, really, genuinely love this team, right? Steve Cohen, diehard Met fan. David Stearns, diehard Met fan. Just like all of us, diehard Met fans. So they know it just like we know it, that this just means more. James, thank you for coming by, stopping by on the show, talking Mets with us. Again, if you guys haven't listened to the Metsed Up podcast, go out there, listen to them wherever you get your podcast. They're available. Shout out to the Foul Territory Network, Foul Territory family, all beautiful people there. Again, thank you, James, for stopping by. Till next time, my friend. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the follow button. I want to thank James Schiano for stopping by on the show. Good guy. Amazing analysis from him on everything that we talked about today. And I cannot wait to bring to you guys everything that we're going to bring to you this season. Is so much in store, so much to watch. So don't forget to subscribe, to follow, and when it comes to the Mets, it's always for life. This is the Mets Life Show, and I am Rashid McDonald.